Our next speaker is Nezette Rydell. She's a meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Boulder, where she supervises 23 other meteorologists and staff who serve northern Colorado and regional aviation with forecasts and alerts. I can just imagine what their office was like during the massive floods in the region in September of 2013. She is personally involved with education related to weather hazards and fire-related weather conditions, such as those that prevailed here during the devastating High Park fire in June of 2012. She holds a BS in meteorology from Texas A&M and a master's in computer information systems from Nova Southeastern University. We're pleased to welcome Ms. Rydell back to CSU for her talk today on the future of big data and human-generated weather forecasts. So, Nezette?
Okay, well, thank you. We are live. Okay, that's good. Sitting at lunch, I'm fascinated by what's been happening this afternoon. Sitting at the lunch table, one of my colleagues said, well, how did you get here? And the answer is, I don't know. I'm a little, overwhelmed, intimidated perhaps by some of the speakers that are sharing the podium with me today. I told someone I think I'm the practical person in the room, but maybe I'm the visionary person in the room. Maybe I'm the in-between person that listens to you guys talk about big ideas and then sits there and goes, how in the world am I going to make this work in my office? So let me just start by saying, I'm a forecaster. I'm just a weather forecaster. It's all I've ever done. Every working day of my life for the last 27 years has been in an operational forecast office, a government civil service operational forecast office. I never see tools this cool. I never see videos this cool. So this is fun. I lead this forecast office now. I really don't do weather very much anymore. I might answer the phone if you call, but most of the time I don't make the forecast anymore. I'm paying the bills, I'm paying the salaries, I'm keeping the cats in the herd. I am leading this office somewhere. I am managing this office and I'm leading it. And the question is, where am I to where and to what am I leading this office? So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and we'll see how this works. Okay. When people talk to us about big data has been a buzzword for 10 years. When people talk about big data, they have big ideas. It's going to solve the world's problems. It's going to solve all my problems, and Nezette, if you just do these things. There are great possibilities. We're going to aggregate data sets that have never been related before. We're going to data mine them. We're going to bring out, we're going to solve the world's problems and all of yours by putting all this data together. As a scientist, if I could take everything we've ever learned about the atmosphere on the planet Earth and everything we're going to learn about it in the future and put that together, understand better how the atmosphere works, give you a better forecast, that's sort of like heading west and seeing utopia rising at the horizon. Okay? That's nirvana for me. But, and you knew there was going to be a but, big ideas, implementing big ideas requires a pretty solid, I don't want your test stuff. People's lives depend on what I do. I don't want your test stuff. I want a solid foundation. And that foundation has to address the infrastructure, the methodology, and the delivery of weather information in my world, weather information. How am I going to do that using your big idea? So that's our first step, is how are we going to take your big ideas and put them into practice? When people talk about big data, if you're like me, I'm a little grayer than most of you in this audience, and I go back a ways, and big data just really means big data sets. Okay? If they weren't big before we started putting them together, they're big now. They're big, they're unwieldy. In the weather science world, in the meteorological world, that's true in spades. We are collecting 1 million parameter points per day of meteorological data. Aircraft alone, 300,000 observations daily and climbing. Almost every commercial aircraft in this country gathers and transmits weather data in the course of its flights up and down every day. Radar, satellite, lightning, surface air, upper air, ships, marine, aviation. It's a tremendous amount of data points, over 1 million a day easily. In terms of numerical modeling, which is the backbone of what we do now, this is how we do weather forecasting now. Numerical modeling, the latest National Weather Service operational model is called the HRRR, the H-R-R-R. I call it the pirate model, and nobody else thinks that's funny, but so laugh. The HRRR became operational in October last year. It runs on a 3-kilometer grid. It has 50 layers in the atmosphere. It starts every hour and it delivers an 18-hour forecast. That is 18 gig of data per hour, 400 gig of data per day. That's just one model. On any given day, my forecasters might look at somewhere between 8 and 10, maybe even a dozen different pieces of numerical forecast models. Around the world, there's probably 2 dozen. The output of that is petabytes, lots and lots and lots of petabytes per day. Let's do this. Yeah. When you make a forecast, no matter who makes the forecast, they're made the same way. You take some observations, you take a numerical model, you put those observations in it, you initialize that model and you run it, and you get an assessment of the atmosphere now and in the future in time. And a human receives that assessment and looks at it. Were the observations good going in? Did the model behave like it's supposed to? Maybe you throw in some experience and say, no, we're going to change this and that. You throw in a little artistry. If you were here last week, there was a lot of artistry in that snow forecast. At the end, you've got a forecast, and that human was in charge the whole time. Okay? From the beginning to the end, the human was in charge. It is a human and machine-made forecast, but very much human-controlled. I graduated from university in 1976, and the world was a lot simpler then. We didn't know as much about the weather, but it was a lot simpler. The limited fine mesh model, the LFM, affectionately referred to as the little funny model, was brand new. It was the first generation of truly numerical prediction models that could start to finish and deliver something. It ran on a 130-kilometer grid. It had 7 layers. We ran it twice a day, and the output was in megabytes. In 1982, when 286 PCs were available, I could run on it and have lots of computation ability left over. Okay? It was a small model that did great things. In 1976, we had time. We had time to examine the observations going in. We had time to examine the 7 layers coming out, and we could produce a pretty good forecast. In 2015, we have huge amounts of data, petabytes, as I mentioned. The human brain in no way can begin to assimilate that kind of data. We can't examine it, we can't assimilate it, we can't really work with it in its raw form. It has far outstripped our capability. Lynn Snellman was a meteorologist working first for the government and later in private sector. He worked from the 1940s to the 1990s. He saw a lot during his career. He was the director of the Western Region National Weather Service sector for 17 years. I agree with a lot of the things he said in 1971. I agreed with a lot of the things he said in 1991. All respect to Lynn Snellman, but where I stand today, in 2015, I'm not sure he's right anymore. I think if we over-relied on that little funny model, we were in deep trouble because it wasn't very sophisticated. I think the 2 dozen models that are running around the world now are pretty doggone good. It is quite possible that observations being what they are, better, more numerous, more geographically dispersed, modeling being smarter. You guys that are out there writing models, whether you're writing them for weather or sociology or economics, this stuff's pretty good. I think from my vantage point in 2015, maybe we can rely on that model a little better. The model nails the forecast 85% of the time, on average, across the US. 85% of the time, the model on its own nails the sensible forecast. Temperature, clouds, rain, snow. Not last week. How many of you were in Colorado last week? Okay. The humans were really important last week. 85% of the time, humans on top of that, maybe we add 5%, occasionally 7%. We're getting pretty good. I never get notes from any of you when we're good. Not one of you wrote me last week and said, nice job, Nezette. Way to nail that snow forecast. If I'd let the model run on 3 days out, Denver had a half of an inch of snow forecast. 6 hours later, the same model was giving it 52 inches. We cannot let it run alone. It does not do well untended. But 85% of the time, it's whipping my rear end. Okay? 85% of the time, if I wasn't there, you wouldn't know it. Okay? That's pretty good. So I think Snellman, maybe we're wrong. Back in when he said this in 1991, he was talking about the 80s, that humans were adding 20%. I think we're adding 5 to 7% now. And I don't think we've gotten less smart. I think the models have gotten much, much better. That's due to computing power. It's due to mathematics. It's due to algorithms that people are writing. They're much, much better. We can do a lot with just that model. What do I think operational forecasting is going to look like? Where am I leading my team? The first thing I'm looking at is the explosion of data. I talked about the HER and how much data it was producing. Next March, NOAA will launch the GOES-R satellite, scheduled to launch the GOES-R satellite in March. It is the first of a new generation of satellite observing systems. 3 times the data, 4 times the resolution, 5 times the transmission speed over what we're seeing today. I don't have a pipe to bring that data into my office. We're a year away from launch, less than a year away from launch, and I don't have a pipe that can deliver that to operational forecasters. None of us are going to see all of that data. Somebody somewhere, some machine somewhere, some process somewhere is going to decide what's important for me to see on any given day. That data, the data stream has far outstripped my ability to analyze it and my ability to deliver it. I suspect that the capability to deliver it exists, but I don't have it in my forecast office right now. In the future, context. People want their forecast in context. Both on the inside, forecasters want to look at analogs. One of the most popular tools around today is a small database at St. Louis University that will let me say, here's my HER model run today. Show me the top 15 that look as close to this as possible over a 30-year period. Then show me how much it rained, how much it snowed, and what kind of severe weather we had that day. That's actually a very small database, relatively speaking. It's huge in size, but compared to the amount of weather data that's out there, historical weather data, that's actually, pretty small. Forecasters love this. Let's go look at what happened last time. Some of the analogs are good, some are bad, but it's a tool we can use. On the user side, people want to know return periods. And if you're not familiar with return period thinking, they want to know how bad is this compared to what? When's the last time it was this bad? Is this the top 10 snowiest, the top 5 rainiest, the top 5 lowest 5 driest? They want to know what the context is in the weather, not only that's happening right now, but in the forecast. They want me to tell you 3 days out it's going to be a 50-year snow event. We're not very good at that, but we can get better. We have historical data. We have the big data set out there that can answer those questions if we can figure out how to access it, make it happen, write the algorithms in real time. Probabilistic forecasts. Again, we've been talking for a decade about delivering. We need to deliver probabilistic forecasts, but Pete wants a point forecast. He wants to know what the temperature is going to be in in Fort Collins today at 1 o'clock. That's a deterministic forecast. Steve's probably happy if I tell him, you got a 10% chance of rain and 50% chance that the temperature will be above 50 and a 90% chance that it'll be above 60. That might be good enough for him. That's a probabilistic forecast. Some folks here at CSU, Dan Lindsay and his group over in the Atmospheric Sciences Department have been for years working on wind models. If you've lived here more than 3 days, you know the wind forecast on the Front Range is tough. If you've ever landed or taken off in Denver, you know the wind forecast on the Front Range is tough. We're never going to get good enough. We can tell you it's a windy day. Tomorrow is going to be a windy day, but I can't tell you if the peak gusts are going to be in Fort Collins, Boulder, or Golden. Okay? We've tried for years to get a model that's good enough to do that, and we have not been able to do it. We're better. We can get close, but we're not there. Maybe we should take those developmental dollars and put them over into producing something that says, on this map, here is a 50% chance of a 75-mile-per-hour gust between noon and 6 p.m. Here's a 20%, here's a 30%. Maybe that's what I should be doing instead of trying to get a point determined at Fort Collins, the wind will be 90 miles per hour at 6 p.m. Maybe that's a better way to go. I think it is. I think we should be moving in that direction. I think the people that use that kind of information, that kind of hazard information, would go that direction. One I didn't mention was, it says event to impact. I think of this as end to end. There is a model under development. It's called the WRF Hydro. And the WRF is the weather part of it, and the hydro is the hydrology part of it. But it takes a weather forecast, delivers a precipitation forecast, and then runs that through some hydrology schemes, runoff, river rise, inundation. The output from that model is an inundation map, a GIS file that shows you areas inundated by the water. I think that's terribly exciting. I think it's 10 years away from being used operationally at all. It's being evaluated on the Front Range, so I'm hoping that in 5 years I'll be seeing it in my office. We'll be playing with it on the side, testing it. I really am hopeful. If we have another 2013 event, I'm going to come down there and just kidnap those guys and plant them in the office. and have them just sit there and run it and test it. NCAR is very excited about this, and there are many other models like that that sort of do this end-to-end thing depending on what the end user wants. So what does the forecast office look like in 5 years? Well, it already looks something like this. Instead of working with one model, we're working with a suite of models. They all have strengths and weaknesses. You know, we love them. We give them little pet names. We know what they're good at and what they're not good at. We know when to ignore that one because it always screams about that. But we put them together. We're going to dump all that output before a human ever looks at it into some sort of blending process. And we're doing this today, but trust me, it's pretty rude and crude. It's alpha, alpha. Okay? I don't know what you have before 1.0, but you know, it's over there. It's on the other side of the decimal point. But we're doing it. We're taking all this model output, petabytes of model output, and dumping it into some sort of blending process that does some averaging, some weighted consensus, some bias correcting. How good was it last week? How good was it 2 weeks ago? In my dream, it would go look at that analog and say, hey, you know, 25 years ago, this pattern did this, and pull that out. Goes into that blending process. Today, that blended first guess forecast goes directly to the forecaster. Okay? And it's a first guess. We have to do some work on it, kind of like last week. You just can't leave it unattended. I'd like to see us, and I think we will see, I'm pretty sure we will see, that first guess go into some other, you know, secondary post-processing. Something that takes, every day that forecast comes to my forecasters and they, you know, raise this, lower that, and move that. Well, you ought to be able to capture that expertise. Expertise, experience, artistry. You ought to be able to capture some of that in some sort of algorithmic process and putting it in that post-processing. Maybe you iterate that back and forth for a while. You know, and for a while meaning, you know, an hour, back and forth, trying to figure, you know, trying to come to the best forecast for delivery, and then, you know, the human pushes it out the door. Now, let's see if I can make this work. For some people, maybe we go straight from post-processing to forecast. We bypass the human action. There are some application needs, there are some users that that's probably appropriate for. FEMA, on a day-to-day basis, doesn't care how much rain we're getting here in Fort Collins. I hate to tell you that, but they don't care very much. They only care if it's inches. If it's hundreds, they don't care. They care that it's raining in Colorado. They care how it will affect the drought outlook. But they don't care about specific amounts in my backyard until they start to be big. Okay? Then they want to go through the human. But most of the time, maybe they just need a fairly high-level outlook at the forecast. So maybe we go straight there. I think a valid question is does the human need to be there at all? I think they do, after last week. I think you would be very unhappy with forecasts that at 6 a.m. said a half an inch of rain, and at noon said 52 inches of snow. I think you'd be pretty unhappy with that. I was pretty unhappy with that. My forecasters are all bald and, you know, white-haired. But it's a valid question to ask. In these days, congressional budgets, I am paid with your tax dollars. My office is paid with your tax dollars. That's a valid question to ask. Is where does the human need to be and how much do they need to be there? What's the interaction? I mentioned that the post-processing piece, and there are some tools already available. This is just a forecast. This is a rainfall forecast for yesterday. This is not a single model forecast. This is a 23 model ensemble blend of the forecast. Okay? Comes straight out of the ensemble. We can look at it in terms of points and look at probability. There's a very high probability of somewhere between 0 and 2/10 of an inch of rain. There's a low probability of somewhere between 1/2 an inch to an inch. Might be valuable to look at it that way. This is synthetic satellite imagery. The image on this side is a 12 or 24-hour forecast of cloud cover. The image on the right is the verifying satellite image at the time. And I don't know about where from you sit, but I think that looks pretty good. We can do the same kind of thing with radar reflectivity. I'm not forecasting rainfall. I'm forecasting radar reflectivity here. This is yesterday from the HUR. This is a 9-hour forecast on the left, and that's the verifying radar image on the right. It's not perfect. It's pretty good. I mentioned the analog tools. We have some ensemble on the fly. This one I think is from Penn State. Pick a few models, blend them together on the fly, and it'll give you an ensemble output. Flash organization does some work with flash flood preparedness and mitigation. Give them a rainfall radar estimate or a radar rainfall estimate, and they will give you a return period for that event. Is it a 5-year event, a 2-year event, a 100-year event? Are you facing a major flood or just a regular rainfall? This is a messy table from somewhere in the Weather Service. It's an ensemble builder, and I show it to you because it is messy. But you know what? My forecasters love this. But this is definitely version 0.5, alpha, alpha. Okay, it is not ready for prime time. But these are the kinds of pieces that we are building. This is from CSU. This is Russ Schumacher's model rainfall output return period. I think we can do 3 or 4 models that way. So the forecast in 2020 looks more like this, I think. From the forecast, with some sort of human involvement over there, we move to interpretation and application to the problem at hand. This is where I think human beings stay in the forecast. They stay in the forecast and they stay over the forecast loop. Okay. How many of you remember the ice and snowstorm in Atlanta a couple years ago? The mayor of Atlanta had a really bad day. He went to bed on Friday night, having gotten the forecast from the 10 o'clock news, and at 10 a.m. Monday, he couldn't figure out why his city was at a standstill. The forecast changed. You in Colorado may not understand this, but in the South, it's hard to snow. It's really hard to make snow and ice. 3 days out, that forecast changed several times, and he didn't keep up with it. His staff didn't keep up with it for him. I blame his staff. It's his staff's fault. They're supposed to keep up with that stuff. But he's on television trying to explain why it was so bad. Weather forecasts need interpretation. They need a delivery mechanism. They can't stand alone. Ask the governor of New York. Yeah, he kind of had a rough winter. Okay. Where's the place that snowed some? Buffalo had a really rough winter. But he's got a meteorologist sitting at his elbow the whole time. Okay, New York City airports have a meteorologist, a government meteorologist, sitting in the tower at the airport the whole time. So forecasts need support. They need delivery. And I think that's what, again, keeps us in the loop. Just a sidebar about climate, everything I said applies. Climate and weather forecasting are so inextricably intertwined, you cannot separate them. Congress would like to tell us to spend more on weather forecasting and less on climate, and it doesn't matter. Okay? So if you could tell them it doesn't matter, it's the same model. Okay? It's the same model. We don't tell them, but it's the same model. But we do get questions. We have skill in the short range, 2 to 10 days, and we get questions after every event. Where does it rank in context? Do we have to adapt to this? Do we have to get used to this? So climate and weather world's very much a mix. It's very much the same. Back to where we started, big ideas, big possibilities. We need infrastructure, and I need your help. It's great to be on the front page of the New York Times with your big idea. Big data is going to solve this problem. And then you go home, and I'm stuck with how to make that happen. It costs money to build delivery systems, internet pipes. Okay? I need somebody writing some really smart algorithms. You know, where are the mathematicians in the office? Because we don't do that internally. We're forecasters. We take data output, and we tell you what's going to happen with the weather tomorrow. Okay? I need somebody looking at these kinds of things in order to implement the promise of those really big data sets that are coming down the pipe. We are drowning in data now. We have outstripped our capability as human beings to handle it. We need to learn how to deal with it because people need to know about the weather. They're going to need to know more and more, and we have more and more to tell them. But we're drowning in the data, so I need somebody to take some of this big data, parcel it, package it, visualize it. Give me some tools to visualize it so I can show Cindy what it's going to look like. You know, here's what I'm talking about, Governor. Here's where the snow is going to be tomorrow. Here's what we need to do about it now. Okay? The promise is there. It's going to be exciting in the forecast office for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And humans are going to be in at least for the next 5 because I'm going to be here. So, okay. I'll stop there. Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, how do you see the trend in reliability and multi-day forecasts changing over time, and also how much does the butterfly effect limit the ability to do that?
Okay, the question is about how do I see the trends changing over time and butterfly chaos effect. Well, we understand chaos better and better. We'll never understand perfectly, but we know it exists. So we can account for some of that in long-range forecasts, and I think we see that best in some of the 3 to 12-month forecasts that are now being put out. How do I see them changing? Elaborate a little bit. Oh, okay. Okay. We know that right now we're going out 1 to 7 days, and by the end of 2016, that'll be 10 days. And the demand is there for more. We have some skill in 24 days, 2 weeks. We have demand and some skill from 2 to 4 weeks. Okay? We already have that. We're not delivering those forecasts in anything except an outlook, but there is skill. We can also measure some of the confidence, you know, how close are we on track. We have tools that are letting us do that. We know that forecasts beyond 7 to 10 days are driven very much by different cycles. El Nino, the Madden-Julian oscillation, there are a number of these whose names you may or may not have heard of. As we get better at sensing those, realizing how they're moving, being able to predict how they'll move, we are better in that middle range, that 2 to 4 week. I wouldn't be surprised if before I retire, we are doing more in that 2 to 4 week period. I know we're going to 10 days next year. I think we are. My boss keeps saying we are, so I believe him. Yes, sir?
The models you were talking about describe levels. Starting out at 7, now at 10. What form are those levels?
It depends on the model. The little funny model uses something called sigma levels. I don't know what that is. It's a level. It's a way to break up the atmosphere. Some of them use standard pressure levels. Okay? In a standard atmosphere at 700 millibars, that's about 3,000 meters, and something happens. So it depends on how the model breaks those up. They are not equal. You may have 20 layers in the lowest 50 millibars of the atmosphere, and then they get thicker as they go up. It depends on how the model is designed. There's something called the FIM, the fixed icosahedral model, that actually instead of using levels uses instead of using grids uses iso triangles of some design and moves them. You're kind of getting away from my area. You can tell I didn't do all that well in math. So, okay. Somebody over here, yes, sir.
As more and more mobile devices are becoming connected with barometric pressure sensors within them, humidity sensors within them, and perhaps others that I'm not as familiar with, how much is that starting to factor into?
Hugely. Hugely. We get storm reports via cell phone, and we get tens of thousands of them a day. We thought maybe 400 weather geeks would pick this up. Tens of thousands of you are sending us storm reports on your cell phone. Yes, there are temperature and pressure sensors in cell phones and in cars. Okay? There are some huge privacy issues about collecting that data from cars. Okay? Your rental car might be in a place it's not supposed to be. It's too warm for Minnesota. The data's already there. Companies are already trying to move that data. The Weather Service would love to get some of that data, but it's working out these sorts of issues. And then databasing. A couple of years ago, the president said we have to cut down on the number of data centers in the government. Do you know how many data centers the Weather Service has? Each forecast office was designated a data center. It's 122 offices. That doesn't even count the satellite guys and the ocean guys. It's just the forecast office. So. We have to figure out how we're going to work around some of these requirements. And the fact that it's costly. The government is not flexible, if you hadn't noticed, in budgeting and in planning. We are not very flexible, and we're not able to buy Phil's latest tools. It takes a while for those to trickle into our bailiwick, our area, our sandbox. Okay. Yes, sir?
Have you been able to utilize the cloud?
In some very simple ways. There have been experiments or tests going on for a couple years. Security is a big concern. I mean, we operate under the same security as, say, the Air Force Office, Weather Control, and the Hurricane Center. We're all interconnected, so the security is very high for these systems. But yes, we've been doing some experiments. Slow. Bandwidth is a huge problem for the Weather Service. Bandwidth is a huge issue. I'm going to pour down all this satellite data. I got no bandwidth to deliver it to a forecaster. I'm in Boulder, and I'm blessed with bandwidth. But if you're out there on the end of the runway in Cheyenne or Elko, Nevada or Brownsville, Texas, bandwidth's tough. It costs a lot of money. I haven't seen you guys saying you want to pay more taxes to improve my bandwidth. Okay. All right.